A cold wind dragged the last breath of the storm across the broken fields, leaving behind silence so heavy it felt like the sky itself had given up. Samuel Carter stood alone in what used to be his farm, a tall, broad-shouldered man of 40 with a weathered face carved by years of sun and quiet endurance. His dark brown hair, streaked faintly with gray, clung damply to his forehead, and a short, unkempt beard framed a jaw that had learned long ago not to tremble. His pale blue eyes, once steady, once warm, now carried the distant stillness of someone who had survived more than he ever spoke about. Neighbors used to say Samuel was a good man, the kind who fixed fences for others without asking. But after his wife died, something in him had folded inward, like a house with its lights turned off room by room. Around him, the farm no longer resembled anything alive. The barn had collapsed into a jagged skeleton of wood and twisted nails. The fields, once neat and patient, lay drowned beneath thick mud, as if the earth itself had been pressed down by an unseen hand. Pieces of his home were scattered across the ground. Shingles, broken beams, fragments of a life that had taken years to build and only one night to erase. He did not move at first, not because he was in shock, but because this kind of silence was familiar to him. Years ago, when his wife, Eleanor Carter, a gentle woman with soft auburn hair, warm, freckled skin, and a quiet laugh that could soften even his hardest days, had passed away after a sudden illness, the world had already gone quiet once before. Back then, he had learned that grief did not arrive loudly. It settled in, slow and permanent, like dust. The storm had simply finished what life had started. Samuel walked forward eventually, boots sinking slightly into the wet ground, his gaze drifting over the ruins without urgency. There was no anger in him, no shouting, no desperate grasp for what was gone. Only a steady, almost stubborn calm. Because somewhere deep inside he understood something others might not. When a man has already lost the person who made a place feel like home, losing the place itself does not break him the same way. It only leaves him with nothing left to distract him from the emptiness. 3 days later, the sky finally cleared, leaving behind a pale sunlight that felt almost apologetic as it touched the wreckage. Samuel Carter moved slowly through the remains of his farm, his tall frame bent slightly forward as if the weight of the past still rested on his shoulders. His hands, rough, cracked, and lined with dirt that no washing ever fully removed, worked without rhythm, lifting broken boards, dragging aside twisted metal, stacking what little could still be used. There was no urgency in him, no visible grief either, only a quiet persistence that had become his way of surviving. He did not expect anything to be saved. He only worked because standing still felt heavier. Near the collapsed edge of what used to be the tool shed, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft whimper, almost lost beneath the creaking wood shifting in the wind. Samuel paused, his pale blue eyes narrowing slightly, not in fear, but in recognition. He followed the sound and found a small dog trapped beneath a splintered plank. The animal was a young, mixed breed, no more than a year old, with short, sandy fur matted by mud and a thin frame that spoke of a life not always cared for. One ear bent awkwardly, and its dark eyes, wide and uncertain, held that fragile mix of fear and hope only animals seem to carry without shame. Samuel crouched down, his movements careful, deliberate. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low and steady, the kind of tone that once soothed restless cattle and long ago a woman who used to hum in the mornings. He lifted the plank, ignoring the strain in his arms, and the dog scrambled free but did not run. Instead, it stayed close, trembling, watching him as if trying to decide whether this man belonged to the same world that had just nearly crushed it. He didn't reach for the dog again. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging its presence was enough, and returned to his work. Still, the dog followed, keeping a careful distance, its small paws leaving faint prints in the mud behind him. Hours passed before Samuel reached what had once been the far corner of Eleanor's garden. The wooden fence there had collapsed inward, and the flower beds, once arranged with quiet care, were buried beneath debris and soaked earth. He stood still for a long moment, longer than he had allowed himself anywhere else, his gaze fixed not on what was there, but on what used to be. That was when he saw it. Half buried beneath charred wood and rusted scraps lay the old water pump. Its once green paint had peeled away in patches, exposing dull metal beneath, and one of its pipes was bent at an unnatural angle. It leaned slightly to one side, as if it had tried to stand through the storm and failed at the last moment. Samuel stepped closer, slower now, something shifting behind his eyes. He remembered how Eleanor used to stand right there every morning, her auburn hair tied loosely back, sleeves rolled up, her hands guiding the flow of water across the soil with a patience he never fully understood. She used to say the flowers listened, that they grew better when someone believed they would. He had laughed at that once. Now he knelt. The cold metal met his palm, rough and unwelcoming, yet unmistakably real. He brushed away the dirt with his fingers, tracing the edges as if confirming it hadn't disappeared like everything else. For a brief moment, the wind seemed to quiet again, as though even the land was waiting. Behind him, the small dog sat down, watching in silence. And for the first time since the storm, Samuel did not feel like he was standing at the end of something. He felt paused. As if the world, for reasons he did not yet understand, had left one small piece behind and was waiting to see what he would do with it. The pump did not respond. It coughed, rattled, and fell silent each time Samuel Carter tried to bring it back to life, as if it had already accepted an ending he refused to believe in. He dragged it closer to what remained of the house, setting it beneath a crooked beam that still held a single working bulb. The faint yellow light cast long shadows across his face, deepening the lines that years of quiet endurance had already carved into him. His hands, once steady but unremarkable, were now constantly stained with grease and fine rust, the skin splitting in small places where the cold night air found its way in. Still, he worked. He began with what he understood: bolts, pipes, anything that could be taken apart without breaking further. Each piece came off slowly, placed beside him in careful order, as if the machine deserved respect even in its broken state. The metal groaned under his touch, brittle in places, stubborn in others. More than once, he had to stop, close his eyes, and steady his breathing. Not from frustration, but from something deeper, something heavier that threatened to rise if he allowed himself to think too long. The small dog stayed. It lingered at the edge of the dim light, watching him with quiet attention. In daylight, its sandy coat revealed uneven patches where fur had thinned, and its ribs showed faintly beneath its skin, but its eyes had changed. They were no longer wide with fear. They followed Samuel's movements with a cautious trust, as if the animal had decided this man, broken as he was, might still be safe. Samuel noticed eventually. One evening, without looking up, he pushed a small piece of dry bread across the dirt floor. The dog hesitated, then crept forward, ate quickly, and retreated, but not as far as before. Days blended into nights. Samuel lost track of time, measuring it instead by progress so small it would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. A cleaned valve, a straightened pipe, a replaced seal, improvised from scraps of rubber he had scavenged from the wreckage. It was not proper work. It was not even guaranteed to hold. But it was enough to continue. Late one night, a figure appeared at the edge of the property, framed by the weak beam of a truck's headlights cutting through the dark. Thomas Reed, a neighbor from a few miles down the road, stepped out slowly. He was a man in his late 50s, tall but slightly stooped, with a square face and thick gray beard that gave him a permanent look of stern patience. His denim jacket hung loosely over a heavy frame shaped by decades of labor, and his eyes, sharp and observant, carried the weight of someone who had seen farms fail and men follow them down. Thomas approached without rushing, his boots crunching softly over gravel and debris. "Heard about the storm," he said, his voice low and even, the kind that didn't expect much in return. He glanced at the scattered parts of the pump, then at Samuel. "That thing won't run again." Samuel did not look up immediately. He tightened a bolt, tested it, then moved to the next piece. Only after a moment did he speak. "It will." Thomas exhaled through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief. "You always were stubborn," he muttered, though there was no malice in it. He stayed a while longer, offering a few practical suggestions, pointing out where the damage might be too deep, where the metal had likely warped beyond repair. Samuel listened, but said little, not out of pride, but because he already knew the truth in Thomas's words, and chose quietly to work against it anyway. When Thomas finally left, the headlights faded and the night closed in again. Samuel sat back, staring at the disassembled pump spread before him. The small dog had moved closer now, lying just within the circle of light, its body curled but alert, as if keeping watch. Samuel wiped his hands on a worn cloth, then rested them on his knees. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of it all, the broken land, the empty house, the years he had already lost before the storm ever came. Then he leaned forward again, picking up another piece, because somewhere between the rust and the silence, he had begun to understand something simple and stubborn. If this machine could be made to work again, even imperfectly, then perhaps not everything that had been lost was truly gone. And so he kept going. Morning arrived quietly, the kind of fragile silence that follows destruction, as if the land itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Samuel Carter stood beside the rebuilt pump, his tall figure outlined by pale sunlight that stretched across the ruined farm. The machine looked no better than before, its surface still scarred, its pipes uneven, its body a patchwork of salvaged parts, but something about the way it stood now felt different. It no longer leaned like something abandoned. It held itself, imperfect but stubborn, much like the man beside it. Samuel's face, rough with days of unshaved stubble, remained unreadable, though his pale blue eyes carried a quiet tension, as if he were standing at the edge of something he did not yet trust. The small dog had moved closer over the past days, no longer keeping its distance. Its sandy coat had begun to dry and soften, though it was still thin, its ribs faint beneath the fur. A faint scar showed along its front leg, likely from a life before the storm, but it moved with growing confidence now. It sat near Samuel's boots, tail resting still against the dirt, watching him with calm, unwavering attention. It had not left since the night it chose to stay. Samuel reached for the starter rope. He paused. For a moment, his hand hovered there, fingers slightly curled, as if the act of pulling it carried more weight than it should. Because this was not just a machine anymore. It had become a question, one he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. He exhaled slowly and pulled. The pump shuddered, releasing a dry, hollow sound that echoed faintly across the empty land before fading into nothing. He waited, then pulled again. This time the machine responded with a deeper vibration, a rough mechanical cough that lingered just a second longer. The pipes trembled, the metal joints rattling as if arguing among themselves. Samuel did not move. His body had gone still, not out of fear, but out of a strange, cautious hope he had not allowed himself to feel in years. The dog stood up now, ears slightly raised, sensing the shift. Samuel pulled a third time. The sound came differently, not strong, not clean, but alive. The pump jerked, then steadied into a weak, uneven rhythm, like a heart relearning how to beat after too long in silence. A thin stream of water sputtered from the bent pipe, hesitating, breaking, then gathering into a fragile flow that spilled onto the dry earth below. Samuel didn't react immediately. He simply stood there, his hand still gripping the rope, his gaze fixed on the water as if he needed proof that it was real. The sunlight caught the stream, turning it into something brighter than it should have been, something almost out of place in a land that had been so empty just days before. Slowly he stepped forward. He crouched and reached out, letting the water run over his fingers. It was cold, unsteady, but it was there. For a long moment he said nothing. Then something shifted in his expression. Small, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, the tension in his jaw eased, the lines in his forehead softened. And for the first time in years, Samuel Carter allowed himself to feel something that wasn't loss. He smiled, not broadly, not with relief, but with recognition. Behind him, the dog moved closer and sat beside him, its body leaning slightly toward his leg, no longer uncertain, no longer ready to run. Samuel glanced at it briefly, then back at the water. The land was still broken, the house still gone, the past still untouched, but the water was flowing, and that was enough. Samuel Carter did not rebuild the farm, not in the way people expected, not in the way storms usually demanded. He began with what could fit within his hands. The water pump continued its uneven rhythm each morning, coughing to life with effort, but steady enough to feed a narrow strip of land he had cleared beside the ruins of Eleanor's garden. Samuel worked that patch slowly, his tall frame bent under the soft weight of routine rather than urgency. His hands, now permanently marked by grease and healing cuts, pressed into the soil with a patience he had never practiced in his younger years. He loosened the earth, removed stones one by one, and shaped the ground into something that could hold life again. The small dog stayed close, no longer a shadow at the edge of his vision, but a quiet presence beside him. Over time, its thin body filled out slightly, its sandy coat growing smoother, though still uneven in places. Samuel never named it, not out of indifference, but because names felt like promises, and he had once learned how heavy promises could become. Still, the dog followed him everywhere, sitting beside the pump when it ran, resting near his feet when he worked, its steady breathing a soft reminder that something living had chosen to remain. One afternoon, while clearing what remained of a collapsed wooden cabinet from inside the house, Samuel found a small metal box, dented but intact. He opened it carefully, his movements slower than usual, as if something inside had already begun to reach him before he could see it. Inside were packets of flower seeds, their edges worn but still sealed, each labeled in Eleanor's neat, careful handwriting. He ran his thumb across the ink, tracing the letters as if they might fade if he pressed too hard. For a moment, he didn't move. The air around him seemed to thicken, not with grief, but with memory, soft, persistent, and impossible to ignore. He could almost hear her voice again, light and certain, explaining where each flower should go, how some needed more sun, how others preferred the shade. Back then, he had listened without really understanding. Now he understood more than he wanted to. He carried the box outside. That evening, under fading light, Samuel planted the seeds. Not in perfect rows, not with the precision Eleanor once had, but with care that came from somewhere deeper than skill. Each small hole in the soil felt like an act of quiet agreement between what had been lost and what might still grow. Days passed, the pump ran, the dog stayed, and Samuel worked. He did not watch the ground constantly. He did not wait for change. He simply continued, watering the soil each morning, adjusting the flow when it faltered, repairing the machine again when it threatened to fail. There were setbacks, leaks in the pipes, patches of dry earth that refused to soften, but he no longer measured his effort by immediate results. Then one morning, as sunlight stretched gently across the land, something shifted. At first, it was easy to miss, a faint line of green breaking through the brown. Samuel noticed it not because he was looking for it, but because he had learned finally how to see small things again. He stepped closer, crouching down, his breath slowing as he studied the fragile shoots pushing upward through the soil. They were thin, uneven, barely strong enough to stand, but they were there. Behind him, the dog moved closer, sitting beside him, its body relaxed, its presence no longer uncertain but rooted. Samuel did not reach out this time. He simply watched. And as he did, something settled inside him. Not a sudden joy, not a loud relief, but a quiet understanding that came without force. He was not rebuilding what had been taken. He was allowing something new to exist. That evening, as the pump released its steady, imperfect stream, Samuel stood beside it, one hand resting lightly against the worn metal. The dog leaned against his leg, calm and unmoving. The land was still scarred, the house still gone, the past still untouched. But the flowers had begun, and for the first time, that was enough to keep him from feeling alone. People say, some things once lost never return, but there are also quiet things, small, almost invisible, that stay behind, waiting for us to notice them again. Not everyone will face a storm like Samuel did, but everyone, at some point, will walk through days that feel empty, days when what once felt like home no longer feels the same. And maybe life isn't asking us to rebuild everything all at once. Maybe it's only asking us to begin again with something small. A gentle habit, a simple act of care, a piece of hope we didn't realize we still had. Like a thin stream of water, just enough to help something grow. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment. Sometimes a few kind words can mean more than we imagine. And if you'd like more stories like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you, keep your heart steady through difficult days, and guide you toward quiet, good things, even when you can't yet see them.